Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Free TFOS, where I take old stories I've narrated and update them to modern audio standards. This particular story is in 6 parts, and this is part 3. If you check down below, there will be a playlist for the other parts. Anyway, on to the story. The Impossible, Part 3. It took legendary French explorer Cyril Cardone 13 years to reach the star system that he would name after his daughter. Dr. Reyes reflected as she flicked through her datapad, reading up on the history. The ship he traveled in was, at the time, absolute bleeding-edge tech. It pushed physics to the limit and reached as close to light speed as humanity could make it go. But it still took 13 years. The Sagan Dyson sphere had been a little under 1% complete when they crossed their fingers and activated the piece of technology that could not be tested, could not be proven to actually work. On September 19, 2199, the Cardone expedition finally had enough energy to break through the Kayazumi-Shusha limit and open a stable wormhole between the now extinguished closest orbiting planet, Promethea, and Earth. Dr. Reyes could only imagine what the moment would have been like from home. Sitting in a lab day and night, never knowing exactly if or when the receiver module would suddenly gather an absolute mountain of energy and open a doorway to a point so unimaginably far away. She swiped with a finger, turning the page to a new chapter. Transport was revolutionized overnight. Energy could be beamed from Sagan directly to Earth through hundreds, then thousands of wormholes fixed in space around the Dyson sphere. 1% of the power drawn from Sagan brought Earth more energy than it could ever possibly use, to the point where detractors questioned whether it was even necessary to finish it. She swiped again. The great San Francisco wormhole collapse of 2203 proved the hard way that keeping a wormhole open in a significant gravity well was not safe. The UEF Council ruled that wormholes on Earth had to be justified and temporary. But even so, technology surged forward at a pace comparable to the Silicon Age at the dawn of the 21st century. But, she pondered, all of that was preceded by a journey through the endless expanse of space that lasted 13 years. She looked up at one of the screens in the control room, the one that held the technical layout of the Zetas. The Skalai had been shocked to see the Sagan, but humanity had its own shock coming. The technology to warp space around a craft to cheat the lightspeed barrier was being slowly worked on by Kayazumi Labs in orbit around Earth. But research was still in its infancy. To have a ship that could subvert the speed limit of the universe dropped in their laps. Dr. Reyes was a senior scientific advisor for more or less everything that happened in the Juliana system. She had almost as much say on the sphere as Commander Church did, and she had direct authority over Project Genesis. Despite, she huffed, it not being in her field. Damn politicians, one scientist was the same as the next to them. But this was arguably even more important with firmer relations if they could secure a functioning warp drive for study. Talk about pressure. She went back to her pod. The Scalai's chief analyst had requested a meeting with her. It was important Dr. Reyes read up on her human history. Wouldn't want to embarrass her species. She'll be here tomorrow, Commander. Church was still learning to read the subtle tells given by Scalai, but he was fairly sure the captain was nervous. I assume all the necessary preparations. You don't need to worry, Captain, he assured her. Your brood mother will be perfectly safe here. I know that you have heard this already, but this is the first contact for us. We are not about to sour our first ever interstellar relation through lax etiquette when meeting a high-ranking official for the first time. Not to mention our own leader will be present. You can bet that we'll take no risks. Captain's tongue flicked. Church had a distinct feeling like this was not common. When the captain had announced that their leader was coming to Prometheus, she had carried a certain sense of panic. You may have gathered that this is quite the honor. I am sure it is. And also, this is highly unusual. Also, yes. The truth is, Commander, this achievement of your race building this, Dyson sphere, it's never been done before. I suspect the brood mother wishes to confirm firsthand that your species does not present a threat to the brood. Church had to fight a small grin. Station staff in the last meeting had guessed almost exactly that as the reason of the surprise visit. Perfectly understandable, Captain. I'm sure she'll find nothing concerning. We have a lot to offer each other, your species and mine."
"I certainly hope so, Commander. I certainly hope so."
The ship carrying the Sky broodmother was much bigger than the Zydus. It also wasn't alone. 5 smaller escort ships preceded the appearance of the great hive ship, almost certainly warships, though no recognizable weapons could be detected. The broodmother ship had no clear fore or aft. It was an irregular cloud-like disk, not rotating as it moved, as if it didn't really matter which way it faced. It lowered itself to a stop at a hover above the facility, making the station staff a little nervous at the thousands of tons of unknown heavy materials hanging guillotine-like over their heads. Sky from the escort craft disembarked first. Bigger the Sky Church had already met. They were quite obviously a military division dedicated to VIP escort. They wore violet-streaked armor and carried angular, spear-like weapons. Finally, the broodmother disembarked. She was not at all like Church had been expecting. The premier of the UEC, along with Church and his senior staff, including most of the scientific personnel, lined up behind Dr. Ray's, laid eyes upon what appeared for all intents and purposes to be a tall, slender human woman dressed in a flowing robe. As she approached, hand extended to shake, the staff could see the telltale signs of alien life. Slitted eyes, coloration patterns on her face that didn't look like makeup, a pair of small, delicate horns curving back from behind her ears.
"Welcome, broodmother, to Prometheus Alpha. I am Premier Whis, representative of the United Earth Coalition. I trust that you trust..."
The broodmother smiled in an entirely human-like way as she grasped his hand.
"Your confusion is understandable, Madam Premier. My name is Broodmother Taurus. My true body remains in my ship. It is too large and too immobile to guide through human-designed structures, so I am controlling this custom-grown drone for diplomatic purposes."
She gestured with a free hand.
"Shall we retire indoors? We have more to discuss than you know."
The captain was present, as was Chief Analyst Dr. Ray's, Commander Church, and Lieutenant Matthews, not to mention the Premier herself. Taurus's honor guard were, by her order, standing just outside the room, blanking the door.
First thing first, I must explain a few things."
The broodmother took her seat at the table as if she had been moving in a human body her entire life. The science team especially noted that she seemed to slide much more naturally into human costumes than her subordinates. She wasn't even using the translators, speaking English like a native.
"There are many broodmothers," she began, "as one who exists at the edge of Sky territory. My specialty is exploration and diplomacy. I engage in and maintain relationships between my brood and the neighboring civilizations of other species. Yes, there are others."
She smiled as Dr. Ray's leaned forward in her seat, eyes shining.
"Normally, it would be a great deal longer before I made any form of personal contact with a newly discovered species. And normally, you'd be invited to come and see me instead of the other way around. However, circumstances make this situation different. I'm afraid normal diplomatic relations must take a back seat this time, and I must act somewhat more recklessly."
Church didn't need his bargaining sense for Sky particularities to see the agitation clear on Taurus's face. She was wearing a human skin, and there was nothing more human than the fidgeting nervousness he could see in her features.
"You see, we broodmothers each control our own sector of space. We are the individual rulers of our own broods and engage in treaties, relationships, and open warfare with other broodmothers, just as we do with alien civilizations. But that is about to change."
She took a device from her pocket and placed it in the center of the conference table.
"There is a Grand Queen, a racial overlord who holds total power over trillions of Sky in the universe."
She activated the device, and a purple-tinged hologram sprang to life over the table, displaying a 3-dimensional map of the universe with a bluish blob in the center.
She sleeps and wakes in hibernation cycle, roughly a millennium of rulership, followed by 800 years of sleep. During the time she is awake, her authority is unquestionable. We, the broodmothers, are all her daughters, and she holds psychic dominance over us that we cannot disobey. The hologram had a bizarre-looking character at its edge, clearly some kind of alien script, denoting exactly what this was map of. Apologies. My techs were able to adjust the display for human eyes, but didn't have time to adapt it properly for your writing system. This is the entire Sky Empire, approximately 50,000 years ago. The Grand Queen has at this point in time just ended her hibernation cycle. I will now play a time-lapse of approximately 100 years per second. Watch carefully. The room of silent humans in Sky watched with curious eyes as the blob in the center of the map that denoted the Empire started growing, slowly at first, then more aggressively. Other smaller blobs of various color would spring up in its path, only to be swallowed by the growing empire and cease to exist. Alien empires eaten alive in their infancy. For 10 seconds it grew faster and faster. Then all of a sudden, it stopped. Rapidly, it began to shrink. Now the queen goes into hibernation. The brood mothers are no longer under control and given their individuality again. Infighting breaks out. Territory is lost. 8 seconds for the fracturing Sky Empire to shrink back to roughly what it was. Other civilizations rose up in the vacated spots the Empire left. Some of them bordered Sky territory without one overcoming the other, a sign of successful diplomacy. Then, at about 50th of the size it had reached at its biggest, the shrinking stopped. Again, the blob grew. Splashes of color bordering the Empire were consumed as before. I will increase the time-lapse speed. Everyone watched, increasingly grim as the Empire expanded and collapsed in a cycle, like the breathing of some gigantic animal that destroyed all around it with every upswing, then tore itself to pieces with every exhalation. Church was an old hand at stellar distances. He could tell, from the shape of the depicted stars and nebula on the map, the monolithic size of the breathing Sky Empire. Even at its smallest, just before the Grand Queen awoke, the Empire dwarfed that of the largest civilizations to rise around it. And even the most successful civilizations did not resist the expansion for any length of time. The hologram paused at the end of the shrinking cycle, now showing the Empire at its smallest, right before it began to expand again. And this is today. Silence. The 1,000 questions buzzed in the skulls of the watchers, but the biggest thought was not the questions at all. The point Taurus was trying to get could not be clearer. Church could already see the next 1,000 years laid out before him, another awakening, another growth cycle where the Empire would expand to consume all that stood before it. His blood ran cold. I practiced diplomacy. There was a clear, distraught look across Taurus's features. She looked almost on the verge of tears. But the Grand Queen, she does not. She is a conqueror. When she awakes, there'll be no more talking. There'll be no more trade, relations, no sharing of scientific progress. There will only be war. And I can promise you, there will be wars we will win. We have always won. I was born 900 standard years ago, created by the Grand Queen as a broodmother who would adapt to unusually strong enemies and destroy for her. That was my purpose. For a century I carried it out under her control. I directed my brood to fight and die, thousands, millions, billions. The numbers didn't matter. I just made more, just as all my sisters did, until the force opposing us had been thoroughly annihilated. It was only when she went to sleep, when I was finally allowed to think for myself that I realized that there was a better way, that I went from a warlord to a diplomat. She was actually crying now. Tears ran down her face. No ugly bawling, just dignified emotion. I have never told any species this, but I have never encountered a species who could harness such power as you do. That is why I must take this chance. Please. She placed her hands on the table and leaned in.
Head slightly bowed, clear desperation radiated from her plea. Destroy the Grand Queen. End of chapter. I would just like to thank the T5 supporters: Bushmaster 117, Caspar Arnholtz, Draxzoon WRE, Elijah Silvercross, Gray, John Carrington, and Severin Cerberus. Thank you very much.